AlphaCo purchases a new computer on 15 November in Year 1. It intends to use the computer 60% for a creditable purpose. Alpha accounts for GST on a quarterly basis and claims an input tax credit in its December BAS in Year 1. Alpha needs to assess the extent of creditable use for the acquisition in the first adjustment period. The first adjustment period for Alpha's computer starts at least 12 months after the end of this quarter, being 31 December in Year 2. However, the first adjustment period is the tax period ending on 30 June. This reflects the June quarter GST period for Year 3, which starts on 1 April in Year 3 and ends on 30 June in Year 3. During the first adjustment period, Alpha reasonably estimated that it had actually used the computer only 50% of the time for a creditable purpose throughout its ownership. The actual use of the computer is less than the planned use, and so 10% too much has been claimed as an input tax credit. An increasing adjustment, which increases the GST net amount, is included in the calculation of Alpha's net amount for the June BAS in Year 3. The value and type of Alpha's acquisition determines that there are only 2 adjustment periods. Alpha's second and final adjustment period for the computer is the reporting period 1 April to 30 June in Year 4. Adjustments to the GST net amount are required when there is a change in the extent of the creditable purpose for an acquisition. For example, when an acquisition was intended to be fully used for a business purpose, but ends up only being used partially for business purposes, or vice versa. The extent of an entitlement to an input tax credit is estimated in the period the acquisition is made. This is based on the intended use. However, if the actual creditable use differs, then subject to time limits, we must compare the actual use in a period to its intended use. An adjustment may be required to reflect the input tax credits that the entity is actually entitled to. An increasing adjustment is required when the actual creditable use is less than intended. This decreases the entitlement to input tax credits as the original claim was too high. A decreasing adjustment is required when the actual creditable use is greater than intended. This increases the entitlement to input tax credits as the original claim was too low. The timing of the acquisition affects when the comparison between actual and intended use is required to be made. Adjustment periods are occasions when the actual use of an acquisition or importation for a creditable purpose must be reviewed. Adjustment periods end on 30 June, being the June GST return. Quarterly adjustment periods therefore start on 1 April, and monthly adjustment periods start on 1 June. However, adjustment periods do not start immediately. There is a delay to allow adequate time to assess each item. The first adjustment period is the tax period that starts at least 12 months after the end of the tax period in which the acquisition was made, and that ends on the following 30 June. While we now know when the first adjustment period is, it should be noted that we don't need to assess the extent of creditable use every adjustment period thereafter. The maximum number of adjustment periods varies with the value of the acquisition or importation. It also depends on whether the acquisition or importation related to business finance, that is, whether it was related to making a financial supply that was not of a private or domestic nature. No GST adjustment arises if the GST exclusive value of the acquisition or importation is below the relevant threshold. However, adjustments may be required for acquisitions or importations over the threshold, with the number of adjustment periods depending on the GST exclusive value of the acquisition. Higher value acquisitions have more adjustment periods, meaning that taxpayers need to compare the intended creditable use with actual creditable use over a longer time frame. If there has been a change in creditable use in an earlier adjustment period, this becomes the new benchmark in which to compare the actual creditable use since acquisition in future adjustment periods. To recap, adjustments may be required where the extent of creditable use differs from the intended use upon acquisition. If actual creditable use is greater than intended, This leads to a decreasing adjustment and a higher entitlement to input tax credits, with the reverse also being true. While adjustments are not required for small value acquisitions, larger acquisitions may require adjustments in one or more future adjustment periods, depending on the GST exclusive value of the acquisition and whether it relates to business finance.